this video is going to show you Soul Master Nightfall getting platinum rank on the Glassway this week whilst using the exotic pulse rifle revision 0. For those who just want to see that, then skip to the timestamps. Over that I can show you the build, etc. So the modifiers for Glassway are Scorched Earth. Champions are obviously Overload Barrier, Equipment Locked, Match Game, the usual stuff. The weekly modifier this week is Attrition. Don't worry about Match Game with Shielded Foes or anything. Don't worry about the shields too much in this. Lightning Crystals is the daily modifier today, which I'm not gonna do. So I'm not going to use an Arc or a Stasis subclass out of courtesy, so that any day of this week someone could load this video up and do it without lightning crystals, right? Because you're only getting lightning crystals every 3 days. So if somebody watches the video after today's reset, and I do lightning crystals, the video is worthless after reset because it changed the entire game. So I ain't doing the lightning crystals Nightfall, just so you know. And it's a cute void burn. Right, so obviously we can account for that in the setup. So as I said, I'm using the exotic pulse rifle revision 0 because it has intrinsic barrier on the weapon. So I'll talk a lot about the weapon, but I'll just say the reason why I've started to use it now in Nightfalls is because this week has given us access to Vorpal Weapon. Vorpal Weapon's a huge one because you're getting a 20% increased damage to the gun against every enemy in the game apart from red bars. So orange bars, yellow bars, bosses, right? And vehicles. So it's a big one. It's huge. Make sure you get Vorpal on if you're a PvE player using this gun. So what I've crafted with the gun so far, bear in mind it's a work in progress. Nothing I'm saying right now is set in stone. The only perk that's set in stone is Vorpal Weapon. I haven't used the gun enough to say everything about it, but so far I've got Hammer Forged Rifle on it for increased range. Armor piece and rounds, which works well with the weapon, honestly. It does work well. I'm not saying it's best in slot because there's high caliber rounds, which is really good on the weapon. There's flared magwell, which is decent on the weapon. So it's not set in stone yet. It's just what I'm using at the minute. I went with Hake Light Burst rather than the Heavy Burst. I didn't like the Heavy Burst when I used it last week. However, I have not used the Heavy Burst with Vorpal yet. I haven't done a comparison, so I'm not sure what's better, but for now I'm sticking with Light Fire Burst for this video. I've only got this stock available, and I went with Frenzy Refit. When we get 4 times the charm, obviously that's the one you're going to be using. So that's what I've got on the gun itself. Other weapons I used is Vouchsafe, a Void Scout Rifle, excellent weapon. And then the Heavy Linear Fusion Taipan, which pretty much anyone has access to. I recommend obviously you craft it, which this is crafted. So for our subclass we use Sentinel Shield, Rally Barricade, Shield Throw, Vortex Grenade, aspects of Bastion, Control Demolition. Fragments are Echo of Remnants, Undermining, Leeching. Undermining's a debuff for Void Grenades, and I don't have a grenade launcher on, so I wanted to have Undermining on it. I think it was pretty important. As if I had used Witherhoard, I wouldn't have used Undermining, but I haven't got Witherhoard on, obviously. So, as I said, I'm not doing the Lightning Crystals thing. I just want to do a standard Nightfall, right? Just using a strong subclass without doing Lightning Crystals. Mods-wise, so we got Helmet, Linear Fusion, Rifle Ammo Finder, Sharp Shooting. Sharp Shooting's for Viced weapons, and I've got Taipan on, so it's handy for that. Elemental Ordnance, Font of Wisdom, Overload Scout, Pulse Rifle Loader. The chestplate has double void resist. Obviously, I'm using Heart of Inmost Lights build with high energy fire. Countercharge. So I've paired countercharge with high energy fire. So you're going to get high energy fire proc when you stun a champion. Very good. Linear Fusion Rifle Scavenger. The class item has solo operative, and this will just call it Overload Void Grenade because that's what it does. Well, it's also stasis, but stasis is terrible against Overload. So I'm using it for the void aspect, obviously, and bomber with this setup. And that's really everything. The one little mistake, it's not even really a mistake, but I should have put Major Spec in Taipan. I left Boss Spec in, so put Major Spec in your Taipan. But honestly, it really don't matter. If you're at 16-10, you're melting these champs anyways. When you're underpowered, it's a bit more important. But that's the build. So Glassway returns, which this season it's a good. That means it's obviously going to be a Grandmaster, which is always a good one to run because there's still a lot of people that are sort of frightened, scared to run Glassway. What you need to realise is if you're not comfortable with the GM difficulty of this Nightfall, then run Masters, because Masters and GMs are the same enemy spawns. So once you know the enemy spawns, that's information gained for GM difficulty because it's the same. There's the same amount of champs, same amount of everything. The differences are the AI of the enemies and all that stuff, and that you're under leveled, obviously. But if you know the enemy spawns, you're halfway there. So I'm going to use a nade to stun this overload. Obviously, I've got void overload nades on, which melt champs because of echo. I've got echo of Undermining on. I had to put that on because I haven't got Wither Horde on. If I'd ran Wither Horde, then I could have done, but I didn't have that on, or any GL for that matter. So we'll use the pulse, obviously revision 0, see what it's like at range. As far as its range goes, it's got really good range for a pulse. It's not scout rifle range, but it's getting there. Which you see that in the gameplay. That's what I try to do with this run, is try and use the pulse as much as I can. You know, especially on champs. You know, try use out the sniper mode. How much damage does that do? Does it compare to Arbalest? What's it like? Because the whole thing with Arbalest is it's a special weapon. It's really good at what it does. It's actually one of the most used exotics in the game now, because of all of its unique benefits. But when they buffed Wishender, the pro for Wishender or any exotic primary that has barrier in it is that it has infinite ammo, and it'll do the same job as Arbalest but slightly slower. But if you pair it with a good heavy, it won't make much difference anyways, which linear fusion rifles are meta at the minute. And it's actually in your benefit not to use an exotic linear anyways. So the game wants you to use an exotic primary really, and especially in Nightfalls. If you're not using an exotic primary, you sometimes putting yourself at a disadvantage. Unless you're using something like Wither Horde and stuff like that, or you know. So the key part about these little mini rooms here, right, where you need to disable the barriers, the form barriers, make sure that you don't spawn in the barrier until the very end, because when you spawn in the barrier, it spawns in all the adds. Now, if you haven't cleared out the overload, the barrier will tether the overload, making it a nightmare for you to stun the overload, giving you problems. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be. Now, this is exceptionally true for when you're on GM difficulty. You need to do everything correctly. So if you follow things in this video, it'll be tips for GM, but obviously I'm going to cover the GM anyways. But there'll be things changing on GM where you'll have to play a bit more passive, and things will have to be done a bit more with a bit more intent than as opposed to Masters and Legend Nightfalls, because these Nightfalls don't matter as much, do they? Like they used to. They're just a gateway for the first half of the season for some Nightfall farming, and most PvE players are really only just waiting for GMs anyways. Your first goal for this room is to melt that overload. That's your first goal, because the same thing is true. If you like melt this mini boss, the AI of the overload will change back up to the backside of the map, which means you need to push up, and potentially you might have to spawn in the barrier. I mean, you might not have to, but you might as well. That might happen. Which means, again, the barrier is going to tether the overload, making your life difficult. So the first thing should always be melt overload first, then VIP target, then the snipers, then push up to get the barrier. Have a super ready, because you're going to use your super, your Roman super that is, to clear out all the adds. No need to run bubble in this. There is no need at all to run bubble. Even in GM difficulty, you wouldn't have to run bubble. I mean, you could. If you wanted to use Fallen Guillotine, then you could, which the last time I done the GM difficulty of this, I did use Fallen Guillotine. It worked out amazingly well. But used it in a defensive manner, which was great. I was really chuffed to see how well I'd done. I might do it again, see what happens this season. See what happens with loadouts and stuff. So with Revision 0, obviously there's two ways of stunning barrier. You can use the sniper mode if you've got the targeting data, or you can just use the light burst. I set up for light burst. I didn't use the heavy burst because I haven't tested the heavy burst yet with Vorpal. I used heavy burst last week, but it didn't have Vorpal and it was terrible. The heavy burst was not good at all. It might be alright now, I don't know. Well, it should be better because it's 20% Vorpal. But the question is, which one's better, light or heavy? I haven't come to a conclusion in my mind about that yet, because I haven't done enough testing myself to see. I'm not going to go off what someone else says. I need to test it myself to see what I think. So that little tip there was, make sure that as you spawn in the adds, get a nade on that ice pillar That will then stun your overload, providing you got overload nade on. That will stun and weaken that overload, and then quickly pull out the linear and melt that overload. That's another tip. Melting that overload as quickly as you can saves you so much time on this little bit. Now the weapon strength. Look at targeting data. Look at how fast it's going up. So you don't get a lot of targeting data from kills or precision hits on like red bars too much. It's where you get the targeting data mostly is on bosses and champs, which that's what this weapon's made for. You can do a good bit of ad clear with it as well, because exotic primaries have the 40% damage bonus from when they got that to what for ads. So it's gonna do good ad clear as well. Yeah. So you know it's doing a bit of both, but it is primarily for bosses. We're going to switch the sniper mode in a minute. I'll debuff first, see what damage we can get. Got a debuff. So we're getting 38k per shot. As I say, something similar to what Arbalest does. I don't know what Arbalest would do for me at 1610 power in this Nightfall. I'd be interested to know what that's hitting, as opposed to what the sniper version of this gun's doing. Be something similar, won't it? The chunk of HP taken off is very similar. But yeah, it's pretty decent. It really is. It's just what everyone is thinking is 4 times the charm going to work with the 4 sniper shots? If that is true, then the power creep of this weapon is even better than we thought. Plus with Vorpal, you know, that's going to be good. Plus if they buff snipers in Nightfall, whichever people are thinking, are they going to buff the sniper damage of this weapon as well alongside it? Because we've seen them do stuff like that, but they always give it a unique buff. Like if a weapon's got an alternative firing mode that is reminiscent of another weapon type, it gets its own slight buff, or doesn't get the buff, or something like that. So it'd be interesting, because if they do buff the sniper damage that this weapon's doing in Nightfall, then this weapon's going to be in meta. If snipers are meta, and then this weapon also gets the buff from it. Again, that might not even happen, what I've just said. They might just leave snipers as it is. They shouldn't. They should be getting them buffed. Because for the whole entire D2's lifespan, I have never felt that snipers are good. Since 2017. The only time they're good is Divinity Day 1 raids. They're buffed with that. But when you're just using them normally, they're not good. They've never been good. Grenade launchers have always been far superior. So it's about time they just make snipers do the proper damage they should. Don't be frightened about it. Just buff them. So I'm going to skip this entire zone. I'll get a stun with my grenade first. Kill the overload. There's a second overload over here, which I kind of forgot about. Because I was going to run past, but I was like, oh wait, there's another overload. So I'll do a plan B option. I'll get a rally down, get my overshield going, kill the snipers at the back. They're the threat right now for me, and I'm really just waiting on a nade whilst trying to kill this sniper. I'm nearly there for nade. I'll get a stun first. Got my stun. Pull out some heavy. One linear shot just about does it for me. Now I know I'm on power, but that's kind of ridiculous. See, this is it. You see, there's loose and finisher now available, where it gives you an infinite heavy. As long as you stun all, you finish all champions, you'll get heavy bricks. Here's the thing though, you don't need to. Heavy does that much damage now in Nightfalls, where it's not needed for you to have infinite heavy anyways, because there's so many abilities now that can do damage to champs like Solar Titan, Arc Strider, Punch Dodge. There's so much Void Walker with its Vortex Grenades Controverse does so much damage to champs. It's not required. It used to be. I remember when Loose and Finish was a big thing, and it was like helping out. This was back. That was just back years ago, ages ago, and it was a huge thing having more heavy, because the sandbox was quite different to now. A lot harder than what it is now. Things are a lot easier. We're getting on a little bit of a sandbox where it's getting a little bit too easy, and I'm not a huge fan of that. Let's just see what happens in Nightfall though. So this capture point, you can just keep spamming your barricade like you see I'm doing. I don't have to jump on and off the capture point. On GM difficulty, you might want to do that, capture a percentage, then backtrack to where the cover is, and then kill the shanks and rinse and repeat. But on this mode, honestly, you don't need to. Just keep getting your rally down and stuff like that, and spam your abilities. We'll show off the scout with explosive. See, explosive is just so consistent on overloads for getting the stun, and it keeps them stunned. Whereas a scout with no explosive is less reliable. So when you're solo and you're doing stuff like this, always lean towards explosive style weapons. I know redirection got a buff and stuff, but that doesn't matter. Explosive's still king for stuff like this. Even though redirection's pretty decent, I do like it. You know, but yeah. Explosive is it's just got so many hidden benefits that some people don't even know about with it. So there's a solar shield spawning. It's the only solar shield in the entire thing. That's fine because we've got access to debuffs. We've obviously got solo operative, so we can melt the shield down anyways, which I'm going to do in a minute. This bit is just sort of a lot of snipers. There's a barrier at the back of the map. You really can play it from long range and you don't need to rush it or anything. I'm going to push up for this solar shield, but he's fell off the map. Whenever a champ does this, be aware, because the champ gets confused and won't put a barrier up, and then the barrier will teleport magically and then put a barrier up behind you. So whenever a barrier does that, just let the barrier reset, because you can be baited in to try and melt the barrier down, and then you end up wasting ammo. Melt down the solar shield, no problem with the Void Grenade. Now it's just a case of the Vandals. So you see where those snipers are, that's where Revision 0 is ineffective from. Once you start fighting enemies that far away, the pulse is useless, and then you need to pull out your scout. But that's just what pulses are. They're meant to be medium range style weapons. They're not meant to cover that amount of range. And the question that people are going to think is, well, is this weapon better than Outbreak Perfected? And I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think it is. Right now, as it is right now, I think Outbreak Perfected is the better weapon. I'm on about when we have access to Barrier Pulse, which we do have Barrier Pulse this season, right now. So I could literally rerun this with Outbreak. And yeah, it doesn't have that alternate fire mode, but that's not what that weapon's about. It's got nanite damage and stuff. So and it melts the shield. It melts the shield like nearly instant because of nanites. So that's the question. They're both similar weapons. Which one's better, Perfected or Revision 0? We'll wait and see when all catalysts come out for the weapon and we have access to it. Then we'll see the comparison between the two. The only thing is with Revision 0 is that it always has barrier in it. Outbreak Perfected doesn't. So it's only going to be relevant some seasons. So the boss and stuff won't spawn in until you kill this overload. I'm just in position. So I fight from left. There's left and right. Left is your best zone to fight from. Whatever difficulty you're playing, always fight from left, because it's just a better position to fight from. And what you want to do is funnel the enemies. So what I'm trying to do here is play passive aggressive. I'm wanting to sort of let the ads see me, not get hit too much, but let them funnel into this little alleyway, because that's where you're going to be more consistent for all the enemies coming into your grenade and stuff like that. Like, I'm trying to bait this overload perfectly. He's being baited into my nade round a corner, so I'm going to use some linear damage, get a rally down, just in case I take too much damage, but I'm pretty much fine. One of the overloads hasn't took the bait, and that sometimes happens. So the overload's going to backtrack one of the ambush areas, left or right. So I can see by my radar he's come this way. So we're going to shoot out a gun, get him around that corner, quickly get a stun, get a debuff going, get some linear. We're too slow on the linear there, so we'll switch back to the scout. But I was quick to recognise that though. And then that's the first phase. So if you see the Transcendent Hydra that I'm fighting, this enemy dictates enemy spawns in this Nightfall, right? So for every bar, there's 3 bars there. For every bar of HP, there is 2 phases. So there's 6 phases in total. Right, of champs, and it rotates between barrier and overload. So the first 2 phases are overload phases. So it's 2 overloads per round. So the key is not to melt the overload dam. Don't be melting that overload dam. Like on phase 1, if you do that, you will spawn 4 overloads. That's causing you, as a solo player, or even teams, a huge problem. So don't be that guy in Glassway who's like melting down the Hydra. It's easy to do that because the Hydra's just there for you. Don't do it. Leave that Hydra alone until all adds are killed from that phase that you've just done. Once you're happy, melt the Hydra. Yeah. And then just take it in stages like that. Teams should be playing like this as well, unless you speedrun it. So this is where I do DPS from. You can't do DPS from here all the time on higher difficulty, especially GM you can't. Because, well, you can, but it's risky, and sometimes it's not worth the risk to get more damage in like this. So I wouldn't recommend it, but on these difficulties it's fine. So look, the barrier's penetrating this boss's shield, because obviously it is, and the sniper will, right? So it's just a good job that it does that. So we're just showing off its damage here, which is getting good damage. Just look at the targeting data every time I'm shooting the boss. So it's doing decent damage. We'll get the boss to a 3rd. That then spawns in, let's call it phase 2. So what I've just done, the 4 overloads, that's phase 1. Right? So there's 3 main phases. So the first phase is done. Boss goes away into the void. Phase 2 is all about rivens and barriers. So the barriers aren't the threat, it's the rivens. So again, I'm coming to this left zone and I'm using this alleyway thing to funnel all the enemies. So but you can't just hide, you've got to strafe in and out to let that Riven see you. The Riven must see you enough to be interested to come over here. Now, as we know, because of Spider of the Dungeon, it's a hot topic of late, Rivens take increased damage from supers, which is a perfect time to use your supers. So notice I haven't used my super on phase 1, I've used it for phase 1 of 2 on the Hydras. Don't melt the main Hydra, sorry, on the Rivens. Don't melt the main Hydra because you will get another 2 spawns of Rivens. So only melt when you're ready, when all adds are dead. When you've took all adds. Obviously there's the barriers. Now you have a choice here. You could leave the 2 barriers up, melt the Hydra. You'll get the Rivens push, but the barriers won't. But that means after the Hydra goes, you've got 4 barriers to deal with. It's up to you, really. It doesn't really matter. I ended up just doing the 2 barriers and then melting the boss. Because the Hydra will de-aggro. So the Hydra right now is de-aggroed and won't come to me. But eventually, the Hydra will re-aggro. See, there's a certain amount of time that you have. You have quite a lot of time, if I'm being honest. The boss isn't here, so you don't need to worry about that. So yeah, we're just going to use a bit of linear to prep the barrier. As I say, we'll switch to the perk. We'll show it off its arbalist skills, so you can see it's one shot on the shield. The big question is it going to one shot on GM? That's where it is. If it's 2 shot on the shield on GM, then it's not going to be as useful as we would have hoped. So until I know that, Until I know that, I can't make a decision, and I won't know fully until Grandmasters come out, or I could test a Master Nightfall 2500 and see if he does it, but until I know that, I'm not sure 100%. But it's one shot on them now, so it does feel powerful. It feels very useful. So now we'll melt Hydra because, you know, it doesn't matter. This is where you do need to send the Hydra away though, because the Hydra is no use to you now. So when you spawning phase 2 of 2, you need to make sure that Hydra gets out of your way, because the Hydra's still up shooting at you while there's Rivens. So send the Hydra away. You've actually spawned in the phase. Make sure that you do that. I've done my nade slightly too early here. I have no super. So how do you do it? Well, look at the Hydras. They don't show their crit spot until they are stunned. So look at this Hydra right now. Hydra's stunned. Should show it, I hope so. Yeah, it's showing crit spot now, look. Means I can melt them much easier. So again, I funneled both Rivens. It removes the penalty of them ambushing you or porting on you. They can port on you, which can be unfortunate, but if you funnel them into that alleyway, they won't port. It's after an extended amount of time. If you're playing around with the Rivens too much, eventually they'll start porting on you and then chasing you, and you won't know exactly where they are. Bear in mind, I've got a radar right now. GMs don't offer a radar to you. So then it's kind of scary. You're running around in there, you don't know if the Riven's around that corner or not. That's where you want to be spamming your barricade and your grenade. Your grenade's going to do massive damage. And obviously your super. But I've supered the first two Rivens. I didn't have a super in time for the second two, because obviously I'm going at a quicker pace than what I generally would on a higher difficulty. We've got the barriers. Only two of them, obviously, because I took the previous two. So look how quickly that's melting. That's with armor piece and rounds as well. So it's melting the shield quick enough to the point where I don't even know if I want to switch to the sniper mode for breaking a shield. I would rather switch to it for just damage. But yeah, it's doing decent damage, providing you hit your crits. It's just the crit spot of Vex. It's annoying. Make sure you pick up any ammo you can as well. I know I've got more than enough ammo for the rest of the fight. 13 shots is it's probably good enough, to be honest. So same thing, we're using this passive aggressive technique where we bait the overlords to us. I have a super to use. Could have used it. Didn't really need to bother with it, honestly, because we're going to need another super anyways, and my super's charging up so slow because of attrition. Attrition delays your ability to regen, and it's really noticeable if you're not picking up the wells. So I'm not going to use my super. I'm just going to save it for the Rivens. So we're just going to use a bit of scout this time. Conserve on a bit of ammo. Like, don't use heavy on every single champ. It is quite wasteful, unless you're using that finisher mod that I said about. But like I said, why do you need unlimited heavy if a scout rifle can kill champs? That's the state that we're in at the minute. You know, that we are a little bit powerful for the sandbox, but I've seen it when we're not powerful enough as well, and there's a fine line of getting it right, of tuning and over-tuning. I suppose it's a nightmare of a game to balance if you look at this game compared to other games. So we've done our damage from there like usual. Send the boss away. I'm a bit late here. I must stress that you need to get to here as quickly as you can, because the longer you leave it, the higher chance of those overlords spreading. You don't want them to spread. We've got a double stun here, which is good. We're stunned with the shield. This overlord's unstunned, but that's fine because we just got our grenade in time. That's the benefits of having a high discipline with this setup. And bomber. It means you're getting your grade far more than what you would usually. And that's with Echo of Undermining, which means I've lost minus 20 stat. So it's important on a Titan, if you're a Titan main, to farm the gear out, the high stats. Titans are really good to spec for in terms of armor. Endgame armor, Titans are perfect to spec for. Easiest class in my opinion to spec for. Warlocks aren't too bad to spec for, but you kind of need recovery because it's linked to your rift. You obviously need resilience and you need discipline, so that's 3 stats that you need. Whereas the Titan only really needs 2 stats. With a bit of recovery, but it ain't the be all and end all. And the Hunter is a nightmare to spec stats for nowadays, since the resilience changes. Absolute nightmare. Because you basically need 4 stats, really. You want good discipline, you want good resilience, you want good mobility. You know, you want a lot, you know, for the Hunter. But again, it depends on the build and stuff. Like, you don't need mobility on certain builds. Like Night Stalker, you kind of do. So we're using this passive aggressive technique again. The only thing was the Hydra there was melting us down, so I had to get the barricade down. 2 Rivens are dead. That's my only goal with that. Make sure you don't spam all your super out there, because once your super goes away, you lose the resistance. Obviously, you gain a massive damage resistance whilst in a Roman super. That is, a lot of people say how bad Roman supers are in the game, but they say about that for DPS purpose, but the game isn't just DPS Destiny 2, is it? There's a lot more to Destiny than just DPS. So like Roman supers have a huge advantage for solo players when you're about to die or you're in a sticky situation. You can pop a Roman super and you can survive because you popped that Roman super. So they're very useful in the game for solo play. They might not be useful for raiding and stuff like that, you know, but they have a place for this. I can honestly tell you, Roman supers have made me survive stuff so many times in the game, I can't count. So I don't have a super for this, so as I say, that's where you want to rely on your grenade and waiting behind cover. Like, sitting behind cover, and the thing about that is, this whole thing of nading an ad and then sitting in cover is that the enemy will just sit in your grenade, whereas if you full on aggressively nade an ad and then start fighting them with your guns, they'll pour out of your nade. So you don't want them to get out of your nade. This is a warlock main needs to know that as well. When they're on reverse hold, use cover. When you get your nade down, get into cover, because then they'll just sit in that Vortex Grenade, and then if you've got good time and if it's a barrier you're up against, you can then peek out at the right time, get a shield break, nade again, or heavy, or whatever it might be. So that's the key thing when you're nading priority targets like that. Some Nightfalls don't have the cover, so that tactic I've just said doesn't always work. It just depends on the environment that you're in. Like some Nightfalls are better designed. Like this Nightfall right here is really well designed because it has good pacing. There's a lot of key priority targets you need to take out. There's a lot of champions. I do acknowledge there's so many champions in this, but it's not a problem nowadays because we're really powerful. And there's a lot of cover. There's a lot of different places where you can stand to avoid the ads. Like Proving Grounds is a terrible Nightfall as opposed to what this one is. I think this is far better designed than that one or a couple of others. But we'll just melt the boss now. That was a solo with Revision 0, the exotic pulse rifle. Hope you enjoy. Thank you.